The red ships filled the sky like drops of blood against the stars. Captain Jake Murphy stood on the observation deck of New Haven Colony, watching the Velkari fleet approach through his binoculars. He counted 50 massive warships, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. "Sir, they're sending another message," said Communications Officer Dan Foster, his voice shaking slightly. "Same demand as before. Complete surrender in 1 hour or they start bombing." Jake lowered his binoculars and looked around at his small command team. Amy Johnson stood at the tactical display, her jaw set with determination. Her husband Tony waited by the door, ready to relay orders to the ground teams. Dr. Ben Cooper sat at his medical station, preparing supplies for what everyone knew was coming. "How many people refused evacuation?" Jake asked. "About 3,000, Amy replied. "Families, mostly. They won't leave their homes." Jake nodded. He understood. New Haven wasn't much to look at from space, just a small mining colony on the edge of nowhere. But it was home to people who had spent their whole lives building something here. Old Pete Wilson ran the general store where kids bought candy. Lisa Martinez taught school in the mornings and tended her garden in the evenings. The Henderson family had just celebrated their baby's first birthday last month. These weren't soldiers. They were farmers, miners, teachers, and shopkeepers. But they had chosen to stay when the evacuation ships came. They had chosen to stand, with Jake and his small garrison against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The Velkari Empire had conquered worlds for 3,000 years. Their red warships carried weapons that could crack planets in half. Their armies had never lost a battle. Every species in the galaxy feared the sight of crimson ships dropping from hyperspace. But Jake Murphy wasn't thinking about the Velkari's reputation. He was thinking about Kevin Wong, the 8-year-old boy who had drawn him a picture of Earth's flag yesterday. He was thinking about Helen Carter, who ran the Colony Council and insisted on staying to help coordinate the defense. He was thinking about all the ordinary people who had looked at the most powerful army in the galaxy and said, "No, you can't have our home." "Send them our response," Jake said quietly. Dan Foster's fingers hesitated over the communication controls. "Sir, what should I tell them?" Jake walked to the window and looked out at the colony below. People were moving supplies into the underground tunnels. Children were helping their parents carry emergency supplies. Everyone was scared, but no one was running. "Tell them this," Jake said. "New Haven Colony to Velkari Fleet. We have received your surrender demand. Our answer is no. We are simple people living on a simple world, but this is our home. If you want it, come and take it." Dan Foster typed the message and sent it. On the main screen, they could see the Velkari flagship receiving their transmission. Jake imagined the alien commanders reading their response, probably laughing at the foolishness of humans who thought they could fight the unstoppable Velkari war machine. The response came quickly. The Velkari admiral's voice filled the command center, speaking in perfect English through the universal translator. "Humans of New Haven, you have one final chance. Surrender now and we will allow civilian evacuation. Continue this foolishness, and every living thing on your world will die." Jake picked up the microphone. Around him, his people waited to hear what their leader would say to the most feared military commander in the galaxy. "Admiral," Jake said calmly, "my name is Captain Jake Murphy, United Earth Colonial Defense Force. I'm speaking for the people of New Haven. We've heard your threats before from bullies just like you. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to fight. We're going to make you pay for every inch of our world. And when you're done counting your dead, you're going to remember that you picked a fight with the wrong species." The transmission ended in silence. Jake set down the microphone and looked at his team. Amy Johnson was smiling grimly. Tony nodded his approval. Dr. Cooper was already checking his medical supplies. Dan Foster looked terrified but determined. "All right, people," Jake said. "The Velkari think they're dealing with the same humans who surrendered at Earth 12 years ago. They think we're soft. They think we'll break at the first sign of real fighting. Time to show them what humans are really made of." Outside, the colonists were putting the final touches on their preparations. The mining equipment had been converted into weapons. Every tunnel and cave had been turned into a defensive position. Rachel Smith, the colony's best engineer, had rigged explosives throughout the settlement. If the Velkari wanted New Haven, they would have to take it piece by piece. The alien fleet began moving into attack formation. Jake knew they had overwhelming firepower. He knew his small garrison of 200 soldiers couldn't stop them in open battle. But this wouldn't be an open battle. This would be something the Velkari had never faced before, a fight against people who refused to give up. Incoming transmission from the outer system, Dan Foster reported suddenly. It's a human ship, Captain. The merchant vessel Lucky Strike. Put them through, Jake ordered. A woman's voice crackled over the radio. New Haven Colony, this is Captain Maria Santos of the Lucky Strike. We heard your transmission to the Velkari. We're 3 days out, but we're coming to help. Captain. Santos, this is Murphy. Turn around, this is a suicide mission. Negative, Captain, we've got 47 ships with us. Merchants, miners, even a few old military vessels. Word is spreading across human space about your stand. People are coming. Jake felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope for victory, but hope that their sacrifice would mean something, that other humans would see what New Haven was doing and remember what they were capable of. The Velkari bombardment began an hour later. Energy beams rained down from the sky, destroying the colony's outer buildings. But Jake and his people were already deep underground, ready for the long fight ahead. As explosions shook the earth above them, Jake Murphy smiled. The Velkari thought they were attacking a weak mining colony. Instead, they had just started a war with humanity itself, and humanity, Jake knew, had never learned how to quit. The ground shook as another Velkari bombardment hit the surface above. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Johnson checked her watch. The aliens had been pounding New Haven for 6 hours straight. Their orbital weapons turned buildings into rubble and streets into craters. But down in the tunnel networks, the colonists waited patiently. They're finally stopping, reported Sergeant Tony Johnson from his position near the tunnel entrance. Landing ships incoming. Amy nodded and activated her radio. All units, this is Johnson. The real fight starts now. Remember your training and watch out for each other. The Velkari ground forces landed with overwhelming power. 50,000 alien soldiers in advanced armor hit the surface, expecting to find a devastated colony ready to surrender. Instead, they found an empty wasteland where every building had become a trap, and every crater hid a fighting position. The first Velkari patrol moved carefully through the ruins of Main Street. They expected resistance, but they also expected quick victory. The Velkari had conquered 1,000 worlds using the same strategy, massive bombardment followed by ground assault. It had never failed. The explosion that destroyed the lead patrol came from beneath their feet. Rachel Smith had spent weeks rigging the colony's underground infrastructure with mining charges. As the alien soldiers stepped on the buried triggers, whole sections of street erupted in flame and debris. Contact! Contact! The Velkari patrol leader's voice crackled over intercepted radio channels. Taking heavy casualties from concealed explosives. Unknown enemy positions. Amy Johnson smiled grimly as she listened to the enemy communications. The aliens were confused. They expected to fight humans in open battle, soldier against soldier. Instead, they were fighting an entire community that had turned its home into one massive weapon. Old Pete Wilson, who ran the general store, had spent his whole life knowing every inch of New Haven's terrain. Now he led small groups of volunteers through hidden paths, striking at Velkari supply lines and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Lisa Martinez, the schoolteacher, coordinated civilian evacuation through tunnel systems that the aliens couldn't find on any scanner. Dr. Ben Cooper worked frantically in his underground medical station, treating both human and alien wounded. But he also found time for research. Within the first week of fighting, he had analyzed captured Velkari equipment and discovered something interesting about their technology. Their weapons are incredibly advanced, he told Amy during a brief strategy meeting. But they're built for fighting other advanced civilizations. They're not designed for this kind of warfare. What do you mean? Amy asked. Look at this, Ben said, showing her a captured Velkari rifle. It can punch through a starship's hull, But it uses so much energy that it needs special power cells. Their armor can stop plasma bolts, but it's heavy and clumsy for close quarters fighting. They built everything to fight other high-tech armies, not guerrilla fighters hiding in tunnels. Amy understood immediately. The Velkari were like knights in heavy armor fighting against wolves. All that advanced technology just made them slower and easier to track. Within 2 weeks, human fighters were using captured Velkari weapons against their former owners. Rachel Smith figured out how to modify mining drones, turning them into flying bombs that could strike Velkari positions and retreat before taking return fire. Tony Johnson trained civilian volunteers in hit-and-run tactics, teaching farmers and shopkeepers how to fight like soldiers. But what worried the Velkari commanders most wasn't the human fighting ability. It was their adaptability. Every time the aliens changed their tactics, the humans adapted faster. When the Velkari started using thermal scanners, the humans learned to mask their heat signatures. When the aliens began jamming radio communications, the humans switched to old-fashioned signal flags and message runners. "This is impossible," Admiral Zektar raged during a command meeting aboard his flagship. "They're primitives fighting with mining tools and improvised weapons. How are they stopping our advance?" "Sir," replied his ground commander, "they know every tunnel, every building, every hiding place, and they're not fighting like soldiers. They're fighting like people defending their homes." That was the problem the Velkari couldn't solve. Their military doctrine was built on conquering populations that would eventually surrender when the cost became too high. But the humans of New Haven weren't calculating costs. They were fighting for their children's bedrooms, for their neighbors' gardens, for the place where they buried their grandparents. By the 3rd week, Velkari casualties were mounting. The aliens controlled most of the surface, but the humans controlled the underground. Every building the Velkari occupied became a target for nighttime raids. Every patrol they sent out lost soldiers to hidden traps and sniper fire. The real turning point came when Dan Foster intercepted a priority transmission from the Velkari homeworld. Admiral Zektar was being ordered to end the New Haven operation quickly. Other parts of the Empire were reporting strange incidents: sabotage, work slowdowns, and open rebellion among conquered species. "They're scared," Amy realized as she listened to the decoded message. "Word is getting out about what we're doing here. Other species are starting to wonder if the Velkari can really be beaten." That night, human forces launched their biggest attack yet. Tony Johnson led 200 volunteers in a coordinated assault on the Velkari main base. They used every trick they had learned: explosives, captured alien weapons, and intimate knowledge of the local terrain. The attack failed to destroy the base, but it accomplished something more important. It showed the galaxy that humans weren't just defending anymore. They were taking the fight to the enemy. As rescue ships began arriving from across human space, Admiral Zektar realized he was no longer fighting a simple colonial uprising. He was fighting something that could spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The idea that the unbeatable Velkari Empire could be beaten. In her underground command post, Amy Johnson received reports from the arriving human ships. They brought news that changed everything. The story of New Haven's stand was spreading to every corner of known space. Species that had been slaves for centuries were beginning to remember what freedom looked like. The siege of New Haven was becoming something nobody had expected, the beginning of a galactic revolution. Captain Maria Santos brought her ship out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system and couldn't believe what she saw. The space around the human colony was filled with vessels from dozens of different species. Zenthari cruisers with their distinctive crystal hulls floated alongside Mordai submarines designed for underwater worlds. Ships she didn't even recognize were arriving hourly. "This is incredible," said her navigator, Lieutenant Chris Lee. "I count over 300 vessels. Half of them aren't even human." Maria nodded as she studied the tactical display. When she had left human space 3 weeks ago, she commanded a small fleet of merchant ships and volunteers coming to help New Haven. But word of the human colony's stand had spread faster than anyone expected. Now she found herself part of something much larger. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Dan Turner. "It's from the surface." Jake Murphy's tired face appeared on the main screen. He looked older than when Maria had last seen him, but his eyes still held the same determination that had inspired people across the galaxy. Captain Santos, welcome to New Haven. Things have gotten a bit complicated since we last talked. I can see that, Jake. What's the situation down there? We're holding. Barely. The Velkari have called in reinforcements from across their empire. They've got over 1 million troops on the ground now, plus orbital support. But we've got surprises. Of our own. Maria could see what he meant. The space around New Haven had become a massive gathering point for species that had never worked together before. The Zenthari had been enslaved by the Velkari for 500 years. The aquatic Mordai had lost their homeworld to Velkari strip mining operations. Dozens of smaller species had similar stories of loss and oppression. How did all these ships get here? Maria asked. That would be me, said a new voice. A tall, blue-skinned Zenthari appeared on screen next to Jake. I am Commander Veltar of the Zenthari Resistance. We have been fighting the Velkari in secret for generations. When we heard about your colony's stand, we knew this was our chance. The Zenthari explained how the story of New Haven had spread through hidden networks of rebels and resistance fighters. For the first time in centuries, someone was openly fighting the Velkari Empire and winning. Not winning easily, but proving that the unbeatable aliens could be hurt. Helen Carter joined the conversation from the colony's civilian command center. Despite weeks of bombardment, the elected council leader looked calm and determined. Captain Santos, we need you to understand something important. This isn't just about New Haven anymore. We've become a symbol for every species that wants to be free. If we fall now, the rebellion dies with us. Maria understood the weight of responsibility that had fallen on the small mining colony. But she also saw the opportunity. For 3,000 years, the Velkari Empire had controlled the galaxy through fear and overwhelming force. Now, for the first time, that fear was breaking down. What do you need from us? Maria asked. Time, Jake replied. The Velkari homeworld has pulled ships from across their empire to crush us here. Their capital system is more vulnerable than it's been in millennia. But we need to keep their attention focused on New Haven until the rebel fleets can strike. Over the next few days, Maria learned how dramatically the situation had changed. The human colony's resistance had inspired uprisings on dozens of Velkari-controlled worlds. Supply lines were being sabotaged. Garrison forces were facing revolt. The rigid order that had kept the empire stable for centuries was cracking under pressure. Dr. Ben Cooper had made another crucial discovery. Working with Zenthari scientists, he had analyzed Velkari biology and found something remarkable. The Empire's soldiers weren't naturally aggressive killers. They were conditioned from birth using chemical treatments that suppressed empathy and increased aggression. We think we can reverse the process, Ben explained during a strategy meeting. If we can get the antidote into their air supply, we might be able to break their conditioning. The plan that emerged was desperate but brilliant. Human and alien ships would coordinate a massive attack on the Velkari fleet above New Haven. But instead of trying to destroy the enemy ships, they would focus on delivering Dr. Cooper's antidote through damaged hull breaches and ventilation systems. Rachel Smith had modified atmospheric processors from mining ships to disperse the antidote as an aerosol. The Mordai contributed underwater expertise to help calculate air current patterns. The Zenthari provided detailed intelligence about Velkari ship layouts from their centuries of captivity. This is insane, Maria muttered as she reviewed the battle plan. We're not trying to kill the enemy, we're trying to cure them. It's the most human thing I've ever heard, replied Commander Veltar. Only your species would try to save their enemies while fighting for survival. The battle began at dawn on New Haven's 47th day under siege. The combined rebel fleet struck the Velkari forces with everything they had. But this wasn't the usual space battle of energy weapons and explosives. Ships deliberately rammed Velkari vessels to create hull breaches. Modified cargo pods released clouds of antidote gas into enemy ships. Volunteers in spacesuits carried dispersal devices directly to Velkari airlocks. The results were immediate and shocking. Velkari soldiers across the fleet began removing their helmets, staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Chemical conditioning that had controlled their minds for years was breaking down in minutes. On the surface of New Haven, the effect was even more dramatic. Velkari ground forces stopped fighting and began walking away from their positions. Some threw down their weapons and collapsed, overwhelmed by emotions they hadn't felt since childhood. Admiral Zektar watched his fleet dissolve into chaos from his sealed command center. His personal quarters were protected from the antidote, but he could see his soldiers throughout the ship beginning to question orders they had followed without thought for decades. "Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from 37 of our vessels," reported his communications officer, who was struggling to understand what was happening to his own mind. "The ground forces are abandoning their positions. What are your orders?" Zektar stared at the tactical display showing the collapse of his unbeatable army. The humans had done something impossible. They had turned his own soldiers against him not through conquest or torture, but by giving them back their free will. On New Haven's surface, Jake Murphy emerged from the underground tunnels to see Velkari, soldiers sitting quietly in the ruins of the colony, many of them crying as they remembered who they had been before the Empire's drugs took their humanity away. The galaxy's most feared army had finally met their match, not in superior firepower or better tactics, but in the simple human belief that even enemies could be saved. Admiral Zektar sealed himself in his command center as chaos spread through his flagship. Through the reinforced windows, he could see his own crew members removing their helmets and staring at each other with confusion and growing horror. The chemical conditioning that had made them perfect soldiers was breaking down, and they were remembering what they had done during centuries of conquest. "Status report," Zektar demanded over his personal communication system, speaking only to officers who remained in sealed sections of the ship. "Sir, we've lost contact with 60% of our fleet," came the reply from his tactical officer. "The remaining ships report massive desertion. Ground forces are surrendering or simply walking away from their positions." On New Haven's surface, Jake Murphy climbed out of the underground tunnels to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Velkari soldiers sat among the ruins of the colony, many weeping as decades of suppressed memories flooded back. Some were trying to help wounded humans, offering medical supplies and food with trembling hands. Dr. Ben Cooper moved carefully among the former enemies, treating both human and Velkari wounded. The aliens looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and shame, struggling to understand how they had become killers when their natural instincts were peaceful. "How long were we like this?" one young Velkari soldier asked Ben in broken English. "How long have we been monsters?" Ben knelt beside the alien, checking a wound on his arm. "You weren't monsters. You were victims too. Your leaders did this to you. Now you get to choose who you want to be." But the situation remained desperate. While many Velkari ships had fallen to the antidote, Admiral Zektar still commanded the most powerful vessels in his fleet. Those ships were sealed against atmospheric contamination, and their crews remained under chemical control. New Haven. "Colony, this is Admiral Zektar." The alien commander's voice boomed across all frequencies. "You have used forbidden weapons against my forces. This will not stand. I am bringing planet killers to bear on your position. You have 1 hour to surrender completely or your world burns." Jake Murphy looked up at the sky where massive Velkari warships were moving into position. Planet killers were weapons banned by every civilized species in the galaxy. They could crack a world's crust and boil its oceans. Nothing could survive their assault. "Captain, we need to evacuate," Amy Johnson urged. "Those weapons will sterilize the entire surface." Jake looked around at the colonists emerging from their shelters. Children ran to their parents. Families embraced in the ruins of their homes. Old Pete Wilson was sharing his emergency food supplies with hungry Velkari soldiers. Lisa Martinez was teaching alien children simple English words. "We can't leave," Jake said quietly. "This isn't just about New Haven anymore. If we run now, the rebellion dies. Every species that looked to us for hope will lose faith. The galaxy goes back to 3,000 years of slavery." Helen Carter approached with 8-year-old Kevin Wong, whose parents had died in the first week of fighting. The boy carried a small flag he had made from scraps of cloth, the colony's symbol of a rising sun over green fields. "Are we winning, Captain Murphy?" Kevin asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Jake knelt down to the boys' level. Around them, humans and former Velkari enemies worked together to treat the wounded and share supplies. Above them, ships from dozens of species maintained a defensive formation despite impossible odds. Yeah, kid, I think we are winning. Not the way we expected, but we're winning. As the hour deadline approached, something remarkable began happening. Ships started arriving at New Haven from across the galaxy, not just the species already in rebellion, but new allies drawn by the story of the human colony's stand. Captain Maria Santos coordinated the growing fleet from her position in the outer system. The tactical display showed an incredible sight. Vessels from hundreds of different worlds forming up in defensive positions around New Haven. This is impossible, her navigator Chris Lee whispered. Some of these species haven't talked to each other in millennia. The Valdrin and the Kresh have been at war for centuries, but they're flying together in the same formation. Fear makes strange allies, Maria replied, but hope makes even stranger ones. The planet killers began charging their weapons. Energy readings showed they would fire in minutes, not hours. But the Allied fleet didn't retreat. Instead, they moved closer to New Haven, positioning themselves between the planet and the Velkari superweapons. All ships, this is Captain Santos, Maria broadcast on all frequencies. We came here to help one small colony defend their home. We stay to defend something bigger, the right of free people to choose their own destiny. Whatever happens next, the galaxy will remember that we stood together. Admiral Zektar watched the alien fleet with growing frustration. His planet killers could destroy New Haven, but firing through the defensive screen would mean killing hundreds of ships from species across the galaxy. The political consequences would be catastrophic for what remained of his empire. Sir, incoming transmission from the homeworld, his communication officer reported. Priority 1 from the High Council. The message was brief and devastating. Rebellions had broken out on 47 worlds. The Velkari homeworld itself was under siege by a combined fleet of liberated species. The empire that had lasted 3,000 years was collapsing in a matter of days. You are ordered to withdraw immediately, came the transmission from the High Council. The homeworld needs all available ships for defense. Zektar stared at the tactical display showing hundreds of ships protecting the small human colony. He had spent his entire life believing in Velkari superiority, in their right to rule the galaxy through strength. But the humans had shown him something he couldn't understand. Weakness that became strength. Defeat that became victory. Admiral, his tactical officer called. What are your orders? For the first time in his military career, Admiral Zektar hesitated. The planet killers were ready to fire. He could destroy New Haven and every ship protecting it with a single command. But doing so would make him exactly what the humans claimed he was, a monster who chose destruction over justice. On New Haven's surface, Jake Murphy held Kevin Wong's hand as they watched the sky. The planet killers were aimed at their world, weapons that could end everything in seconds. But around them, humans and aliens worked together to build something new from the ruins of the old. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, waiting for one alien admiral's choice between the past and the future. Admiral Zektar's finger hovered over the firing control for his planet killers. Through the sealed windows of his command center, he could see his own crew members who had been freed from chemical conditioning. They watched him with eyes full of fear and pleading, former soldiers who had remembered what it meant to have a conscience. Sir, the High Council is demanding immediate response, his communication officer reported. The homeworld siege is intensifying. They need our ships now. Zektar looked at the tactical display one final time. New Haven sat below him, a small mining colony that had somehow brought down the greatest empire in galactic history. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species formed a protective screen around the planet, their crews ready to die to protect what the humans had started. Power down weapons, Zektar said quietly. Sir, his tactical officer asked in confusion. Power down all weapons. Signal the fleet to withdraw. But sir, our orders, Zektar interrupted, were given by an empire that no longer exists. Look around you, officer. Look at what we've become. The humans were right. We are the monsters in this story. On New Haven's surface, Jake Murphy felt the ground stop shaking as the Velkari weapons powered down. Above them, the massive alien warships began moving away from the planet. Their threat finally ended. "They're leaving," Amy Johnson reported from her communication post. "All Velkari ships are withdrawing from the system." Jake looked around at the scene surrounding him. Human colonists worked alongside former Velkari soldiers to clear rubble and tend to the wounded. Children from a dozen different species played together in the ruins. Old Pete Wilson was teaching a group of young Velkari how to tend the colony's rebuilt gardens. Dr. Ben Cooper approached with his medical report. "Final casualty count, Captain. We lost 437 people. The Velkari lost over 3,000 before the antidote took effect. But we've got about 6,000 of their soldiers who want to stay and help with rebuilding." "Stay?" Jake asked. "They don't want to go back to what they were before. Many of them have no homes to return to anyway. They want to help us build something better." Captain Maria Santos landed her ship in New Haven's makeshift spaceport and walked through the colony with amazement. What had been a battlefield just days before was becoming something unprecedented, a community where former enemies worked together as equals. "How did you do it?" she asked Jake as they stood overlooking the construction of new buildings. "How did you turn the galaxy's most feared army into allies?" Jake watched as Helen Carter coordinated construction efforts with a former Velkari commander who was now helping design better defensive systems. "We didn't turn them into anything. We just reminded them who they really were underneath all that conditioning." The real victory became clear over the following weeks as reports arrived from across the galaxy. The Velkari homeworld had fallen to a coalition of liberated species. The Empire's chemical conditioning facilities had been destroyed. Former Velkari colonies were declaring independence and joining the growing alliance of free worlds. But the most important change was happening right on New Haven. Rachel Smith worked with Xanthari engineers to design new mining equipment that could be used peacefully. Lisa Martinez opened a school that taught children from 15 different species. The colony that had started as humanity's last stand became a model for how different cultures could live together. Commander Veltar of the Xanthari visited New Haven 3 months after the battle. He walked through the rebuilt streets with Jake, marveling at how quickly the community had recovered. "My people have been slaves for 5 centuries, Veltar said. "We dreamed of freedom, but we never imagined what it would look like. Your colony shows us possibilities we never considered." "It wasn't just us," Jake replied. "Every species that came here brought something valuable. The Mordai taught us new engineering techniques. The Xanthari shared their art and music, even the former Velkari soldiers contributed skills we needed." That evening, Jake stood in the same observation deck where he had first seen the Velkari fleet approaching. But now, instead of enemy warships, the sky was filled with peaceful vessels from across the galaxy. Merchants, scientists, diplomats, and tourists came daily to see the place where the rebellion had started. Kevin Wong, now 9 years old and taller than when the siege began, joined Jake at the window. The boy still carried his handmade flag, though it was worn and faded from months of carrying it everywhere. "Captain Murphy, my teacher says people all across the galaxy know about New Haven now. Is that true?" "It's true, Kevin. They know about all of us. About your neighbors who wouldn't give up their homes. About your friends who helped take care of everyone during the fighting. About ordinary people who did extraordinary things." "Are we still winning?" Jake smiled and looked out at the thriving community below. Former enemies had become neighbors. Children who had known only war were learning to play together. The galaxy's most powerful empire had fallen not to superior force, but to the simple idea that people deserve to choose their own destiny. "Yeah, kid. We're definitely still winning." 6 months later, the New Haven Accords were signed in the colony's rebuilt town hall. Representatives from over 300 worlds gathered to establish the Galactic Council, a democratic alliance that would replace the fallen Velkari Empire. The signing ceremony took place in the same room where Helen Carter had once coordinated civilian evacuation during the bombardment. Admiral Zektar attended the ceremony as a witness, one of the few former Velkari commanders to survive the Empire's collapse. He had spent months undergoing treatment to reverse his own chemical conditioning, slowly remembering the person he had been before becoming a conqueror. "Captain Murphy," he said as they met outside the ceremony hall, "I need you to know something. When my weapons were aimed at your world, you could have destroyed my fleet. Your people had the means, but you chose to save my soldiers instead of killing them. Why?" Jake thought for a moment, remembering the desperate battle and the impossible choice they had faced. "Because that's what humans do. We fight for what we believe in, but we try to save everyone we can along the way, even our enemies." "Even your enemies," Zektar repeated quietly. "Perhaps that is why you won when everyone thought you would lose. You were not fighting to destroy us. You were fighting to free us all." As the ceremony concluded and representatives from across the galaxy signed the accords that would govern their new alliance, Jake Murphy walked back through the streets of New Haven. The colony was still small, still focused on mining and farming, but it had become something more. A symbol of what was possible when ordinary people refused to accept that evil was unstoppable. The galaxy's most unbeatable army had indeed met their final battle. They had lost not to superior firepower or better tactics, but to the radical human idea that even the worst enemies could become the best allies if given the chance to choose who they wanted to be. And in the end, that choice had saved everyone.